Hey everybody, it's John here. I'm going to do a quick video just to show you how to create a projectile. So if you wanted to throw an item rather than place it, this is part of the bonus for the assignment. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create a new script. I'm just going to call it throw item. And if you remember our place item, so I'm going to go ahead and click on place item here. So just to show you the code, so place item extends this item interface. And so the item interface is this use method, and with the use we pass along the player object, so the game object that represents the player, and then the position of our reticle. And so what we can do for our for throwing, all we have to do is extend our item interface, and that way it doesn't matter whether or not objects can be placed or thrown. We don't have to modify anything else in the code base because when we use it, it's just going to call this use function, be it for placing it or throwing it. So let's go ahead. So here's throw item. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mimic quite a bit of what we've already done. So here I'm making an extend item. It comes back and says it needs to implement that interface. So just go ahead and implement it. And so, so through Visual Studio, it automatically populated this for me. So I now have the use method with the same parameters as what we saw with place method. But now I need to start actually filling stuff in. So I'm going to remove that. And then I'm going to remove the start and the update because we don't use those in the place item. We don't need to use it here either. One thing we want to do for the throw is we want to tell the script how hard we want to throw the object. So let's create a public variable. So just a member variable. We'll call it throw force. So throw force, and we'll default it to being say 10 for now. And we can go back and modify that later. Okay, so how do we throw an object? So throwing an object involves kind of figuring out the direction we want to throw it, and then applying the velocity to that object. So then once we create it, it then starts traveling on that trajectory. If I come back to Unity, what we're wanting to do is with the player's going to point the aim object where they want to throw the item, then hit the right click, and then the item's going to follow that trajectory. So essentially, it's going to originate kind of close to the player and then kind of travel on this path to start. So how do we do something like that? So I'm not going to get into the math. If you go back to the slides, especially the physics slides, it goes over a brief detail on vector math. But I'm going to go ahead, put this in. So I'm going to call this throw direction. And so to figure out the vector for where it'll travel, we're just going to take the aim position and subtract the aim position by the player's position. And so that's going to draw the vector between those 2 points. And so it's going to give us a vector going in this direction. Okay. Now if I come back, I'm going to go back to the place item. So I can find it. And so for place item, kind of the key, we're going to copy and paste some lines here. The lines we're going to copy are these 3 here. So these are the lines that generate the item. So in this case, we instantiate a copy of that item that we put it in a position. We change the name so the name reflects the actual actual item name, so it removes that clone prefix. And then we make it active so then it appears in the world. So I want to make sure I have those lines in there. But now I need to add a few more lines. So one thing that we want to change is where this item is going to originate. So when we throw it, we don't want the item to be thrown where the reticle's at. Essentially that reticle is just kind of telling us the direction it's going to go. We really want the item to kind of appear close to the player. The problem is if we use the player's position, the item just generates inside the player's bounding box, and so it'll just get stuck and or it'll collide with the player and not actually travel. And so we can, I'm going to switch back real quick. So we want to kind of specify a point somewhere between the player and the aim object to have the item appear. So we're going to use, so I'm going to call a new variable. So I'm going to say projectile start. And we're going to use a new method that I haven't talked about, but it's something that, especially if you're going to continue your Unity studies, to really get familiar with lerp. And so lerp, it interpolates between 2 points and will tell you where along those 2 points it'll exist. So imagine we're drawing a line between these 2 points, and if I specify some value from between 0 and 1, it'll tell you the point where it resides. So if it's 0, it'll be at A. If it's 1, it's at B. If I say 0.5, it's the midpoint between those two. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this in. So our start point is the player's position. Our end point is the reticle's position. And let's just say we want the midpoint between those two. So that's where our projectile is going to appear. And then I'm going to replace that aim position with this projectile start. So this is where the projectile will appear once it begins. Okay, so now we've got it where we have the direction it's going to travel. We know where the projectile is going to start, but now we actually need to apply a force. So we need to get to start traveling on that path. And so if you remember kind of how we do it with the character controller, we end up using the rigid body and setting the velocity on the rigid body. We're going to do the same thing with our throwable item. So here I'm going to say new item. So I'm going to get the rigid body component. So rigid, and it has to be rigid body 2D because that's what we're using. And then I'm going to set the velocity. So what I'm going to set it to, well, I want it traveling on the vector that we specified for throw direction. And so I'm going to create, so the difference between, so our rigid body 2D, it takes a 2-dimensional vector, and our position that we calculate here is 3-dimensional. So we have to really just remove the Z component. And we'll do that by saying this vector 2 for the velocity, and then just using the XY components out of throw direction. So I'm going to say throw direct. So for the X, I'm going to say throw direction X, but I want to scale this by whatever we're going to say for the throw force. And likewise, I'm going to do the same thing in the Y. So throw force. And so now we have a velocity that is set equal to our throw direction scaled up by whatever we set our throw force to be. So the velocity set, we get the name, set active to true. So all that's good to go. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to come back. And looks like it's building. Okay. So I'm gonna find. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna take our item that we had previously, and so I'd already been working on this. I'm gonna remove this. Just kind of go back to where it was previously. So previously we had, or I had it set up where I would have my apple as my place item, and now I'm just going to remove that, and I'm going to replace it with this throw item. And so if you remember, we set the apple to be its projectile, so once it collides with the enemy, it's going to kill the enemy. So all that's already set for us. I've just swapped out the throw with the place. So let's go ahead and play. And I'm going to start breaking things. So make sure I have plenty of ammunition here for my demo. Okay. Whoa. So I have it highlighted. I right click. Whoa. Sweet. All right. And then, death from above, sucker. Oh, shoot. That's too hard. I'm going to dial down the throw force and try that again. Oops. I'm a terrible shot. Oh, I must have jumped on the character, so that's why I died. Anyway. So interesting here too is we have this wood block pickup. So let me demonstrate that, because as I was talking about earlier, you could have it where you can have both the placing of items and throwing of items. So I haven't changed anything with regards to the use equipment or the inventory manager. All I'm doing is modifying the scripts that we're tying to the item. So here I have 2 items. So if I click on my wood block and I right click, oops, it put it somewhere. It's probably just out of, the order layer is a little messed up. So there we go. So I just forgot to change the prefab, but that's working. It is working as I intended. And now we'll try this again. Oh, geez. Success. All right. And so you can see I was able to hit the bad guy. Oh, I died. That's not good. And it worked just fine. Another thing you may want to do is when the projectile hits, you don't want the projectile, you may want to have the projectile just be removed once it hits the ground. Right now, say if I throw another projectile, I'll go ahead and throw it. It just skids across the ground and it'll stay there. But we can set up to be removed when it hits the ground. Again, it just goes back to using some of our collider checks. So if we say on collision, enter 2D, and here I'm going to say if we're colliding with, so the collision game object. And if you remember, we talked about layers and tags, and so tags are strings. Layers, you use this layer mask, so it's not a string. It ends up really kind of getting used as an integer. But you can do this layer to name call, and so you can just give it the name of the layer that you're interested in. It'll then make the conversion to the integer and then do the comparison that way. So I said if our object's going to hit the ground, let's see, cannot Why is it? Oh, I'm sorry, I used the wrong one. I want name to layer, not layer to name. So, so here, name to layer, it's ground. So if we're hitting the ground, or if the item hits the ground, we just want to destroy the object. Go ahead and save that. Let's go back, let it build. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run. Alright, and then blink, and then it's gone. Anyway, so that covers what I wanted to discuss with throwing the object. So really, the throwing the object, just to review, you're extending the item interface. And so by extending the item interface, you have to implement this use call. And we'll go through the steps on how to do calculating the trajectory for the projectile and how to apply a force to get it to travel. You already done the work with regards to setting up the projectile, setting up the item to be a projectile and have it interact with the enemy. All you're doing now is just switching out the place item for the throw item, and you can have different pickup items that can either be thrown or placed. So now you actually have multiple uses for different items. And like I said, that didn't, and it required only adding a new script and just changing the components that are being called. It didn't require modifying anything with the player. So anyway, so that should get you covered for that bonus. Definitely take a crack at it and let me know what you think.